Welcome to episode number 49 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Temte. Today we've got Dr. Taggert, or TJ Brooks, joining us. TJ is Dean of the College of Business at the University of Wisconsin at La Crosse, which I am very proud to say is my undergraduate alma mater. Thank you so much for being here, TJ.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I've asked TJ to join us on the show as our third guest in this mini-series on the importance of change management within organizations to get the perspective of business and higher education. So TJ is going to come to us with both of those perspectives. But before we get started, as I always do, it would be wonderful if you told our listeners your story.
Yeah, my professional story is a pretty, I think, fairly traditional one in some respects. In that I did my undergraduate at UW-Madison in economics. I graduated in 1993, which is becoming a long time ago, and moved back home with my parents. My father owned a small business, a packaging company, packaging nuts, bolts, and screws, and was starting up a new business. And so I, in addition to that, I went to work for him for a little while and lived at home and then discovered that maybe that wasn't the best long-term strategy for me and for our family. I wasn't super excited about it. So I only knew how to do one thing, which I felt like was go to school. So I went back to school. My intent was to get a PhD. Eventually, I got into University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which my intent was just to go to graduate school to demonstrate that my undergraduate grades were below my potential. And I was going to try to transfer to another school and pursue a PhD in political science. And I started in economics because I had some, obviously, the undergraduate training in economics. And I got admitted into the terminal master's program. And I was talking to the graduate advisor professor asking for recommendations for graduate school for political science. And he said, there's a lot of economists that do political science, and not a lot of political scientists that do economics. And, economists make more than political scientists, right? And you're halfway to a PhD, so why don't you just stay? And so I said, when you put it that way, that's a pretty good idea. So I stayed and got my PhD in economics from Milwaukee, and then came to UW-La Crosse as my first job. Got promoted, eventually became chair when someone retired, and I decided I thought I could do the job. Was chair for 10 years of the economics department. And then for 2 years before I took my current gig, I was also chair of the finance department as an outside chair. And then the dean retired at the time. This is right at the start of COVID, and I became the interim dean of the college, and then just recently was appointed the permanent dean of the College of Business Administration here. So I describe my career as kind of a process of just falling upwards.
Falling upwards. That's nice. So we have the wonderful intersection point in our career development as both being economics undergraduates. Your story of the poli-sci folks saying, "Hey, if you stay in econ, you can make more money." I had a very similar experience, but in the econ department at UWL, where Keith Sharoni told me, "Andy, if you move over to finance, the classes are pretty much all the same, but you'll make $20,000 more a year as a professor in the finance department."
Yes.
So it's dreadful. It's dreadful for me to hear that poli-sci actually made less than econ.
Right. Our only saving grace in the college at the moment is that we refer to the finance department as just applied economists, and then they show us their pay stubs. So
nice. So TJ, if you had to pick one event, you're very self-deprecating. You're very modest in your description of yourself. For those of you that have not met TJ, he's much more dynamic and kind of a force than he's letting on here. And because you don't get to be dean of College of Business without some of that. So what's one event in your life that was a real accelerant for your career?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little bit. As I said, I kind of feel like I've fallen upwards. I think that, if there was one event that I can think of in my career here at UWL that was sort of memorable because it encapsulated both my personality and then what would eventually be sort of an aspiration to take charge a little bit. When I was in my first year, there was some transition with the health insurance. So the first couple of months, we were not under any health insurance. We had to actually pay for our own health insurance for the first couple of months before the state took over payment. And the first year, there was merit pay, and the university was then required to sort of decide how they wanted to distribute this between the different ranks. Like what percentage would go to everybody, what percentage might go for merit, what percentage might go for equity adjustments. The concern at the time was the full professors were it's called compression. And so they decided on Faculty Senate that some full professors decided they were going to take a large portion of that pay plan and allocate it towards their pay away from the assistant professors. So I was at that Faculty Senate meeting early in the fall. You can imagine how this is going to go. And to this day, the people that were there that are still around still joke about it. But I was sitting in the back, and I was sitting next to an econ colleague who was a full professor. And I raised my hand to speak, and I was mentioning the health insurance benefits that we had to pay for health insurance. And I said, so I'd really appreciate it if you didn't steal any of my pay raise. And I used it in kind of what I thought was like a, haha, joke. Like I'm being kind of snide, and but I'm not intending the chair of Faculty Senate at the time was very agitated with the conversation, a full professor, and then proceeded to gavel me out of order. And in the process, like nearly broke the gavel and said, "Nice. You're out of order." And he started screaming very loudly. And I looked at my colleague who, again, next to me was a wonderful man, Wahab Khandekar. And I looked at him and said, what? Like, what did I say? And he's like, you're just being you. But apparently I wasn't appreciated. And that was the moment when I decided, well, I think I better join this body, this august body, the Faculty Senate. So next year I ran for Faculty Senate, and there were just enough people that were entertained that they voted for me. And so that was sort of the beginning of the end of the beginning of my administrative ambitions, I guess. I felt like I had something to say and wanted to have a voice at the table.
So a snide comment, a little passive aggressiveness, and all of a sudden you're the head of the Faculty Senate.
That's right. It took 2 years before I was on the Faculty Senate, but yeah, or before I was on the executive committee, but it was pretty soon after.
All right. Well, the lesson there is find your voice, but maybe in a little more constructive fashion.
Right. It's been a 23 year now process of slowly maturing.
Right. Yeah. We are always maturing. So let's get into our topic for the day, which is change and change management. Can you recall an example or two from your career where a big change event occurred and the company or institution, in your case the institution, didn't take into account the change cycle that everybody would need to go through, and what were the ramifications of that?
Yeah, so just to remind everybody, I work for a state-funded state institution that's part of a system. So I've got lots of examples of things. None of them sort of are what I would call like these huge organizational changes. At least none of the ones that I'm going to talk about. But they're sort of pretty big process changes. Big in the sense of big for the organization, but they might not intersect with me in the biggest way. But one of them is an interesting one recently. They've changed sort of the model for sort of clearing POs and doing requisitions and all sorts of that type of the financial part of the house. And the problem is, I think, with all of these changes that I've seen that are like this, that have failed or gotten off to extremely rocky starts, is that inevitably they're designed to solve somebody's problem, but it's somebody's problem at the top who wants to make their job easier. Or even sometimes in a lateral position, they want to make their job easier, and they come up with a solution to make their job easier without considering the cost to those end users, who then become sort of loud and resistant adopters, right? And so we had something, it's called Shop UW, and I think they're slowly working out the kinks. For example, there are things like we used to have to, as a dean, I'd have to approve every 20-cent purchase as an approver, which involves multiple clicks.
Right.
And as you can imagine, the ability to sort of spend time ascertaining whether it was a legitimate purchase of that 20-cent item is not so worth my time. The reality is, it's just sort of, again, all of these things that have failed and oftentimes failed a lot. To me, most of the ones in this higher ed setting have happened because they are making someone's job easier without without this sort of concept of a Pareto improvement, right? Where they can at least compensate someone for their harder job if they have a harder job beneath, or at least understood how they interacted with the software or the process. And so sort of just really a failure to understand the users throughout that change process.
Yeah, in my next book, I have a chapter on change and change management within businesses and institutions, and I purposefully at the end of that chapter have a section on ERP systems and large technical installations within businesses. So things like digital transformations, where at the end of the day, whose problem are you really trying to solve?
Right.
And if it's the challenge that customers are having, and a business or institution has to define their customer and who their customer is, then that's an easy thing to understand from a change perspective. But yeah, I totally agree, and I've been involved in those change episodes where it becomes a bigger challenge for folks downstream, and somebody in finance or somebody in position X, their life is being made easier, but at the expense of a lot of other people. And at the end of the day, are you really changing for the better? And I totally agree with you that that is not always thought all the way through.
Right.
So there are a lot of discussions going on in business and the popular press about the preparedness of college graduates for the world of work. So we're gonna take a little change of tact here, but still on the topic of change. The ability to embrace and navigate change is one of the key workplace skills of the future. What's happening within the UWL College of Business to prepare students for a lifetime of change and uncertainty?
I think I want to take this apart just a little bit. I think higher ed is really at a bit of a crossroads in terms of we have two goals that seem to be, at least in the short run, in conflict. So one of those goals is to student success at content acquisition, right? Like you're teaching them how to draw supply and demand curves, or you're teaching them like when to change supply and demand curves. And you've got this module that you're working on as part of this principles of economics class, and you want them to be successful at the assessments that you're going to give them. And you're very focused on making sure that, what you expect of them is clear, what they have to do is clear, and that after having performed that, they're given a grade that makes it clear what they understood to have learned, and that focus on all of that sort of clarity and dramatically reducing the uncertainty of the world so that they can acquire that particular tool is very helpful for acquiring that particular tool. The challenge is what you've described, or what you're asking me about really is this idea of then how we're preparing them for the uncertainty and messiness of the world and the change that they're going to experience. And that requires something a little bit different. Like, we've taught them the tool, but now they need to know when to use the tool, right? In the environment, when to use the tool, and the practice using the tool in the real world. And so that's something that, oftentimes has happened outside of class, or sometimes, I think historically has just happened on their first job. We haven't done a good job of preparing them for that. But I think what's happened is the better we've become at preparing them to acquire that skill of the tools, the worse we're getting at preparing them for the uncertainty of the world. So what we've been working on a lot in the College of Business is sort of making sure that students are getting sort of more authentic experiences, right? So, whether that be including some problem-based learning, whether that be doing some actual consulting projects for real live clients as part of their class. And the opportunity to sort of do those things in a class, even sometimes, even if it's not the full class, it's just a particular project in the class, being exposed to the messiness of the world at least helps them understand that these tools, box of tools we've taught them, can be used. And sometimes they're not even used in exactly the way we taught them, but the concepts are still there and they can find their way through. So that's the thing I think that, we're working on to help students with that uncertainty. But it's a tough one. And again, I think there's a tension in helping students acquire these tools versus helping them acquire those broader skills of dealing with change and uncertainty.
Yeah, I've thought for quite a while that grades are a big impediment to the acquisition of experiences and experience, and the bridge from direct learning to experiential learning. I was really excited to see some of the things that you are doing with one of our local businesses. You had the consulting project right in there. Can you spend a little bit of time describing what your students were doing there?
Yeah, so we have a local company, Quick Trip, which is a gas and convenience retailer located in the upper Midwest here. And they're partnering with us, and they're one of the clients for this class that includes students taking basically the first HR class, the first marketing class, and the first finance class together as a cohort, along with a class on professional communications. That's really a consulting class. And they're given a charge, and it's a real charge. I mean, this particular company has 1,000 employees, and it's located in our relatively small town of 50,000. And they're projected to grow by 20% a year for the next few years. And they're really going to need that professional staff. And so they had a company culture that was about being present. They went through COVID, and now they need to adopt to sort of the hybrid workplace, or potentially be a little bit more open to some of that in some of the roles that they have and adjust their corporate culture. And so they asked the students to do a couple of things for them. One, like how can they recruit, retain workers in this sort of new work environment, and to certainly do it locally. And our students then spend, a third of the semester diving into the research, bringing in the content that they learned in their class lectures for those three classes of HR, finance, and marketing. And so to bring those all together, to be able to then provide them a white paper, a presentation on some of the internal marketing that they should be doing to their employees, the external marketing they should be doing to college students, they had some of the groups had done some surveys of college students to find out about what their interest was in telework, and it was very interesting because, of course, as recruiters, they were going out and they would go out to a Madison or an Eau Claire, and the students would approach them and say that we were only looking for 100% remote. And they interviewed our students and they were looking for 100% in person. Well, some of these differences are, of course, the students that want 100% remote are the students who want to stay living in Madison and stay living in Eau Claire. And the students who are interested in being 100% in person are the students interested in staying in the Crosse, right? So it worked for them. But that was something that I think the recruiters hadn't really sort of contemplated and understood, and that was information provided by our students. And so the students get this great experience of doing this high-level corporate presentation for the recruiting HR director and her staff that are on the front lines, and they're able to ask them these questions. And the students are then put in that sort of uncomfortable position of having to provide a on-the-spot answer based upon their research and the things that they've learned. And so it really is, the students talk about it this way, but you can really see it. It's transformational in the sense that you can see the students mature almost in front of your eyes, and the confidence that they gain from this because they really just experienced what we're talking about today. They came into something very uncomfortable. They were uncertain, unsure of themselves. They figured out a way through to find some answers. Maybe not the best answers. Maybe not, they're not going to be the top consultant of the year, but they found their way through that process. Yeah. And they feel like now they can do it again, having done it once. But they so seldom get that, I think, in their formal education earlier, that they don't have that confidence. And so you see them mature in front of your eyes, and they come out at the other end with an ability to talk about that experience, and it's really great.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, the word value and the phrase value add really comes to mind, which is, when you're in a class and you're pursuing a grade, that's the value that you're going for. And that value is very self-centered. That grade is for me and my GPA. Mm. And I'm just on a hamster wheel pursuing better and better grades so I can get a great GPA. But on the other side of that is the experiential learning process, which is about adding value. These students are adding value to a real business that's going to ultimately be able to serve its employees and its customers better. So this, this message is for all of my academic colleagues out there, that we need more experiential learning opportunities, and not just side projects, but weave them into courses so that the value that is created is something that the student can directly see. And it's not just, I drew a supply and demand curve correctly, so yay, I got an A, and I created value that.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's really killing two birds with one stone on some level, right? It's having a meaningful impact on society, and maybe the business society, or if you're working with a nonprofit, you can have that kind of meaning that students can get from it. But it's also sort of the internal learning that they're doing as well at the same time. So it really is effective use of their time.
Yeah. So I've got to ask you this question. Yeah. We're here together. Well, you're a current academic. I'm a former academic. How do we build stronger change management muscles within faculty and administration? Because earlier in our show today, you were talking about what are major changes within an academic setting, but would be minor changes in a business setting. Things move very slowly in academe, and how do we build more resilience and better change muscles within those that really have an influence on the future direction of our institutions?
Yeah, I think this is. I want to take this one apart a little bit too. I think in some ways academic institutions are extremely agile, entrepreneurial, and there's a lot of change that goes on. If you think about, I mean, like we do research, right? So like we're literally when we're doing research, we're on the forefront of that change and understanding change and being open to new ideas and using them. I mean, you get rewarded in research by not sticking to using the same methods that you've used for 100 years, but adopting new methods. So like we are very good at it in that respect. And sometimes even to a fault, right? When it comes to teaching and pedagogy, I think sometimes we are a little bit too quick to adopt the newest pedagogy or to change things in our classes for change's sake because we want to entertain ourselves and things like that. But that's interesting that exists in this organization, that the organization itself can't fundamentally go through any kind of big changes, right? I mean, it's completely resistant to it. But part of it is like, if you think about, I mean, I won't say there's good reasons for it, but I think it's understandable. I mean, the faculty, to encourage that innovation in research and innovation in teaching, we've selected for a bunch of people who are like independent contractors who are very entrepreneurial minded, but in their own way, right? So not sort of people who are as quick to adopt an organizational culture and go along with changes. They're the people who are the exact ones who are always going to sabotage any change, right? They're the ones at the back of the room who are going to say, but so-and-so's theory says we can't make that change. And then, two of them say that, and then next thing you know, they got a group of 4 or 5 and you can't get anything done. And that includes sort of like, just going through the buffet line, right? Because someone will have been arguing about the process by which you go through the buffet line, right? So they'll sabotage the simplest of things. So I think, I like this idea of the burning platform in the sense that this is what I think ultimately will lead universities to change is literally, their house will be on fire and they'll have to. And you're starting to see that with some places like, COVID is a good example, right? I mean, who would have thought that most of these traditional universities where they had science faculty teaching that refused to ever teach a class online in any fashion or another, say it was absolutely impossible. And in 3 weeks, they did it, right? Yep. So that's the type of burning platform, I guess. And that demonstrates that change is possible in these organizations. And not that there was the greatest change and that you would want to, but it is possible. Unfortunately, I think for lots of the traditional institutions, it's going to be through those types of events that they change. And the one coming is the demographic change, right? That is going to, reorganize the space. The slow one that's been occurring has been the defunding of public education, right? So the smaller and smaller state contribution to public education has made public institutions much more like private institutions, and that's forced us to sort of change more slowly to adapt to it. But other than sort of, again, encouraging leaders to adopt a lot of the leadership skills that are required of good change leaders, the empathy, the transparency, the communication skills. Other than encouraging that, I do see higher ed as just in terms of that larger organizational structure being dragged kicking and screaming into the next century.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is one of those moments where somebody's going to listen to this and go, TJ, the thing that you told us at the top of the show that you were in the back of the room and made a snide comment. So maybe this is one of those moments.
Oh, I'll admit that now that I'm on this side of the table, my former self is my worst enemy, right? Like I'm looking for my former self in the room going, that guy is going to sabotage whatever I say. So I'm trying to, again, mature.
So we've just got a couple of minutes left. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple of quick hitter questions for you. On this podcast, we talk about skills and reskilling. What are some of the top human skills that you'd encourage the leadership the leadership team of an academic institution that's contemplating a major change to proactively instill in their teams and employees?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is interesting, right? So, the skills that leaders need to have to sort of lead through change are different than the skills for lack of a better word, the followers or the folks who are sort of implementing those changes have to have. I mean, the leaders, they want to be good communicators and listen and be transparent, empathetic. But the implementers really have to they have to approach it. And this is ultimately what has been effective in the higher ed space. They have to approach it like it's a research question or an opportunity to participate in change, right? And if you can flip it to something that is something that is going to make them excited. So in the area of academia, if you can talk about sort of some of these changes as a research project for faculty to get them excited about it, I think that's helpful. And the same thing sort of for the types of skills that you're going to want to have. You're going to want to encourage people to have the skills to, one, be open-minded and flexible, to be able to provide feedback, right? Because you're going to want honest, regular feedback. That's effective and useful, right? So helping people understand when it's useful, when it's not useful. And then for them to, again, sort of be open to seeing the opportunities to have an impact, right? They have to be a partner in the change. And they have to understand that they're a partner in the change, through real authentic partnership. And I think that's all the difference.
Yeah.
Will make all the difference.
So now to the student end of things, a graduating senior walks into your office and says they want to improve their work readiness and chances of securing meaningful employment after graduation. What's one of the top things that you tell them?
Well, fortunately, I don't get a lot of these questions. They don't come into my office.
Well,
but this is good. This is good. They should, and this will be good practice. I'll try this one out. Look, I think that from the students that would come into to my office, I think are the types of students that would have come out from a business school and maybe have a little bit of the mindset that they've just learned a specific skill, right? Sort of vocational mindset. And the first thing I'm going to say to them is that you still got a liberal arts education. But the thing that's going to help you most in your career is this openness to continually learning, right? That the belief that you walk out that door when you graduate and that it's over is, if it's been sold to you, I'm sorry, but that's not the case. You have to. I think some kids it's been sold to them, like when you're done with college, you're done. But it's being open to sort of learning new things, new experiences, and whether it's just sort of like formal learning or informal learning, it's just being open and willing to embrace these experiences. And your question asks about meaning. They have to continue to look for what is meaningful to them in their life, and that, at the end of the day, I think are the most important skills that they could have going forward.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for supporting one of lifelong learning, one of my key taglines there. So as we conclude our time together, I'm a University of Wisconsin at La Crosse graduate. I'm keen to ensure that schools like UWL remain relevant for decades into the future. What's one thing that you're excited about that will keep UWL and its College of Business at the forefront of business education?
Yeah, it's really what we were talking about earlier, this willingness for some of our corporate partners and some of our nonprofit partners to engage with our students, because I think they're finding that it's a great pipeline for them and their needs in the future, but they also find it rewarding for them and their employees to be able to engage with the students, right? And so it's this ability to get students connected with people in the world of work, to work on a problem together, and for both of them to benefit from that relationship, and sort of a breaking down a little bit of what's the traditional classroom and the traditional professor-student model, and really sort of helping students realize there's lots of people they can learn from, and that they can see those people coming back in and learning something from them, right? enthusiasm of the 18, 19-year-olds is pretty infectious. And, you can get stale working with your colleagues sometimes in a business. So being able to spend some time with some younger people and hear some of the things that they're doing in their lives and things that they're excited about really can help to rejuvenate you. So it's really a two-way street, but it's creating those opportunities is what I'm really focused on for the College of Business in the future.
Yeah, I'd like to just punch that point of the two-way street. If you're a business leader and you're disappointed with the outputs that you get from your local college or university, but you're not actively doing anything about it, then you really can't be disappointed with the results that you're getting, because it is a two-way street. You have to work together to create those outputs, those students who are going to become your valued contributors in your business. So just sitting back and waiting for great outputs, I think, is a fallacy.
Yeah. If I could share just a quick point on this. So, for the longest time, I was afraid to engage the business community because I felt like, this is my job. I'm supposed to grade the students. Who wants to come in and listen to a presentation from students? And it didn't dawn on me until later that it's when they come in, they're kind of like grandparents, right? So like grandparents come in, they take the kids, and as soon as the kids misbehave, they let them go. So when these folks from the business world come in, they get to listen to this presentation. They get to offer their wisdom. They get all of the feedback, excitement from students, and they feel knowledgeable. The students look up to them. They don't have to assign a grade. They're not doing the actual grading. They're not doing any of the hard work, right? So they're just doing like the important work, right? That feedback part, which is really important. And so when someone described that to me and how important that was to their employees to get that, it dawned on me like, yeah, I'm not actually asking them to grade. I'm just asking them to do the fun part of it. And so it really is beneficial for both sides.
The fun, but very impactful,
Yes.
The leading through example.
Yes.
That's what one of the things that you're giving back as an employer who's really engaging, like Quick Trip is doing with local colleges. So we're out of time. TJ, thank you so much for your contributions to the business and institutional community through this conversation. My name is Andrew Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting services. Please like, subscribe, and rate, and we will see you next time.